The large silver ship landed smoothly on the shining platform. The doors opened with a soft hiss. Jio Kim took a deep breath and stepped out. This was his first time away from Earth, and now he stood at the entrance to the famous Galactic Academy of Higher Knowledge. "Welcome, human," said a tall blue being with 4 arms. "I am Assistant Dean Morrow. You are the first of your kind to join us." Jio bowed slightly. "Thank you for accepting me." The academy was huge. It looked like a city made of crystal towers that reached up to the purple sky. Students of all shapes and sizes moved between buildings. Some flew, some crawled, some had wheels instead of legs. None looked human. "Professor Taejo is waiting to meet you," said Morrow, pointing to the tallest tower. As they walked, Jio noticed how other students stared at him. Some looked curious, but most seemed unimpressed. He heard whispers. "A human. Here. Their brains are so simple. I heard they still sleep 8 hours every day. What a waste." Jio kept his head up. He had earned his place here. The entrance test had been hard, but somehow he had passed when millions of others from more advanced worlds had failed. Professor Taejo's office was at the top of the crystal tower. When Jio entered, he saw an old being sitting behind a desk. Taejo looked almost like a turtle, but with gray skin and eyes that glowed with a soft yellow light. The professor had been teaching at the academy for over 200 years. "Ah, the human arrives," said Taejo, his voice deep and slow. "Come closer, young one." Jio stepped forward. The office walls were covered with strange symbols and old star maps. "You are wondering why you are here," said Taejo. "Yes, Professor," Jio admitted. "There are 73 species at this academy. All are smarter, faster, and more advanced than humans. Our civilization just learned to travel between stars 50 years ago. Most species here have been doing it for thousands of years." Professor Taejo made a sound like gentle thunder. It took Jio a moment to realize the old alien was laughing. "Intelligence takes many forms," said Taejo. "The Viridians can remember everything they see. The Lentarians can think about 20 problems at once. The Navidians can see 11 dimensions, but intelligence is more than facts and calculations." The professor touched a panel on his desk. A hologram appeared showing Jio's test results. "You solved problems differently," Taejo said. "Not the expected way, not the taught way. Your own way." Jio remembered the test. While others had used standard methods, he had found shortcuts, made guesses based on patterns, and sometimes just followed his gut feeling. "The academy needs different ways of thinking," said Taejo. "That is how knowledge grows." A bell sound filled the air. "Ah, time for the welcome ceremony," said Taejo. "Tomorrow your classes begin. You will find them hard. Many students think you do not belong here. They may be right." The professor's eyes glowed brighter, or perhaps they are wrong. That is what we will discover. As Jio left the office, he saw his schedule appear on his personal device: advanced quantum physics, multi-dimensional mathematics, galactic history and ethics, computational biology. His stomach tightened. On Earth, he had been one of the smartest students. Here, he was probably the slowest. That evening, Jio stood at the window of his small room, looking at the 3 moons in the sky. He was far from home, surrounded by beings who thought humans were simple creatures barely worth teaching. "I will prove them wrong," Jio whispered to himself. "I have to." Little did he know that Professor Taejo was watching him through the academy's monitoring system, nodding slightly with approval. "Yes," the old teacher mumbled to himself. "This one might be the one we've been waiting for." Jio's first week at the academy was harder than he expected. In multi-dimensional mathematics, the teacher spoke so fast that Jio could barely follow. The other students typed notes at amazing speed while solving problems in their heads. "The answer is clearly the 7th dimensional cross product," said a Viridian student named Axe. He had a large head with 6 eyes that blinked in sequence. Even a child would know that. Geo looked down at his own work. He had not even finished the first step of the problem. In advanced quantum physics, things were no better. The teacher, Professor Yulo, asked Geo a question about particle wave functions. I'm still working on it, Geo said. Professor Yulo made a clicking sound with her three mouths. Perhaps this material is too advanced for humans. You may observe only. The worst was the dining hall. Geo sat alone every day. The food was strange, moving purple cubes and glowing blue liquid. It tasted like metal and salt. He missed rice and kimchi from home. On the fifth day, someone sat across from him. It was a student about his height, but with golden skin that seemed to shine. You look miserable, the student said. I'm Haniel. Jiho, are you making fun of me too? Haniel shook his head. No, I know what it's like to be different. I'm half Terran, half Proximan, not fully accepted by either. Jiho looked closer. Now he could see that Haniel looked almost human, except for his golden skin and slightly larger eyes. Why did you come here? Haniel asked. Most humans avoid the academy. I wanted to learn, Jiho said. On Earth, I was top of my class. Here, I'm nothing. Haniel nodded. These other species have engineered their brains for thousands of years. Viridians removed emotions to make more room for memory. Lentarians added extra brain sections for math. But they lost things too. Like what? Joe asked. You'll see, Haniel said with a small smile. That afternoon in computational biology, the class had to design a system to heal damaged organs. The Navidian students created complex models with perfect calculations. When it was Jiho's turn to present, he felt sick with worry. My solution is simple, he said. I looked at how starfish regrow their arms and how salamanders regrow their tails. I combined these methods with the way human stem cells work. Professor Lin, a tall green being, studied Jiho's design. Interesting. You used existing patterns in nature rather than building from theory. Unexpected, but effective. After class, Professor Taejo called Jiho to his office. Your approach to the biology problem was unusual, the old teacher said. The other students start with equations and work forward. You look at what already works in nature and adapt it. It's not as clever as their methods, Jiho said. Different, not less, Taejo corrected. I watched recordings of your classes. In mathematics, you drew pictures to understand dimensions. Others just memorize formulas. I'm failing most classes, Jiho admitted. Grades measure how well you follow expected paths, Taejo said. They do not always measure understanding. The professor's eyes glowed brighter. The academy has existed for thousands of years. In all that time, certain questions remain unanswered, perhaps because everyone tries to solve them the same way. Jiho left the office feeling slightly better. At least one teacher didn't think he was hopeless. That night, he found a message on his device. It was from the academy board. Student Jiho Kim, your performance is concerning. You rank in the bottom percentile of all students. If no improvement is shown within 30 days, your scholarship will be reviewed. Jiho showed the message to Haniel in their room. Don't worry, Haniel said. The academy doesn't understand humans yet, but they will. Professor Taejo has been watching you closely. Why would he care about one failing human? Joe asked. Because, Haniel said, the professor is much older and wiser than he appears, and he has been waiting for someone different. 2 weeks passed. Joe still struggled in most classes, but he was not failing anymore. Haniel helped him study late into the night. Sometimes, Jiho found new ways to solve problems that surprised even his friend. One morning, a loud bell rang throughout the academy. It was not the normal class bell. This sound was deeper, older somehow. What's happening? Joe asked Haniel as students rushed around them. The announcement, Haniel said, his golden skin glowing brighter with excitement. It happens once every year. Come on. They joined the crowd moving toward the great hall. The hall was huge, with a ceiling that showed the stars and planets moving in real time. All 5,000 students gathered there, along with the teachers. The room buzzed with talk in many languages. Professor Tejo walked to the center of the hall. He wore formal robes that shimmered like oil on water. The room fell silent. "Students of the Galactic Academy," Tejo said, his voice stronger than Geo had ever heard it. "Today marks the beginning of our oldest tradition, the Riddle of Ascension." A wave of excitement passed through the crowd. Geo noticed many students pulling out devices and connecting to databases. Others formed small groups, talking quickly. "What's going on?" Geo whispered to Hanul. "The riddle is the greatest test at the academy," Hanul explained. "Professor Tejo will present a riddle that has never been solved. Anyone who solves it graduates instantly with highest honors and gets a position on the Galactic Council. Has anyone ever solved it?" "Never," Hanul said. "The riddle changes each year. It's said to come from the precursors." "Who are the precursors?" "An ancient species that disappeared long ago. They seeded intelligence throughout the galaxy before vanishing. Some say they ascended to a higher plane of existence." Professor Tejo raised his hands, and the hall grew quiet again. "The riddle will be presented in 7 days," he announced. "As tradition demands, I give you this time to prepare yourselves. Study, think, open your minds. For the riddle tests not just knowledge, but understanding." The professor's eyes moved across the crowd, then stopped when they found Geo. "Remember," Tejo continued, "what seems impossible may simply require a different perspective." The meeting ended, and students rushed out, already forming study groups and planning strategies. "Everyone takes this very seriously," Geo said as they walked back to their room. "Some species have been trying to solve the riddle for generations," Hanul said. "The Viridians have a family that has attended the academy for 12 generations, each member trying to solve it. The Lentarians have built special quantum computers just for this purpose." In their room, Geo found a message on his device. It was from Professor Tejo. "Student Geo Kim, please visit the ancient library tomorrow at first light." The next morning, Geo went to the library. It was in one of the oldest buildings of the academy, made of actual stone instead of crystal. Inside, real paper books lined the walls, along with data crystals and memory cubes. Professor Tejo waited for him between 2 tall shelves. "The others are preparing in their own way," the professor said. "They study technical manuals, run simulations, build algorithms. You should prepare differently." "How?" Joe asked. "Explore," Tejo said, gesturing to the shelves. "These contain not equations or formulas, but stories, art, philosophy, and history from 1,000 worlds. Knowledge takes many forms." "Will this help me solve the riddle?" Joe asked. "The riddle has never been solved by knowledge alone," Tejo said. "Perhaps it requires something else, something humans still possess that other species have engineered away." "What's that?" The professor smiled, his old face creasing. "That is for you to discover." As Geo began exploring the library, he noticed several senior teachers watching from a distance. They looked concerned. "Is this wise, Tejo?" one whispered, directing the human toward the ancient texts. "We have tried every other approach for millennia," Tejo replied quietly. "It is time for something new, or perhaps something very old." For the next 6 days, the academy changed completely. Classes stopped. Everyone focused only on preparing for the riddle. Geo watched as the other students worked in ways he could barely understand. The Viridians created huge databases, downloading all the knowledge they could find. The Lentarians built special computers that filled entire rooms. The Navidians drew complex maps of different dimensions, looking for patterns. "They do this every year?" Joe asked Hanul. "Yes," Hanul said. "And every year they fail. But they keep trying the same ways." While the others prepared with technology and calculations, Geo spent his time in the ancient library. He read stories from hundreds of worlds. He studied art from civilizations long gone. He looked at music patterns and poetry structures. Some days, he just sat quietly, thinking about what he read. Professor Tejo visited him occasionally, watching without saying much. On the third day, Dax, the Viridian student, found Jiho in the library. "What are you doing, human?" Dax asked. His 6 eyes blinked in sequence. "Reading stories. This is not how you prepare for the riddle." Professor Tejo suggested it. Jiho said. "The professor is unusual," Dax said. "My family has tried to solve the riddle for 12 generations. My great-great-grandmother built the largest quantum brain ever made. My father added 3 more processing cores to his own brain. This is how serious preparation looks." After Dax left, Jiho felt doubt. Was he wasting his time? The stories and art were interesting, but how would they help with a riddle no one had ever solved? That evening, he met Haniel in the garden outside their building. "Maybe Dax is right," Jiho said. "I should be studying like the others." "The others have failed for thousands of years," Haniel reminded him. "Doing the same thing and expecting different results is not logical." "But what am I looking for in these old stories and paintings?" Jiho asked. "What do you see in them?" Haniel asked instead of answering. Jiho thought for a moment. Patterns, connections, different ways of seeing the same thing. In human art, we often find beauty in what's not perfect. In human stories, the hero often fails before succeeding. Haniel smiled. "That might be more useful than you think." On the 5th day, Jiho discovered a small book hidden behind larger ones. It was very old with actual paper pages. The text was in an ancient language, but his device translated it. The book contained thoughts from a precursor philosopher. One passage caught his attention. "True understanding requires both light and shadow. Knowledge without context is like a star without space, bright but alone. The answer often exists in the space between known points." That night, Jiho dreamed of stars and shadows. He woke up with a strange feeling that he was getting closer to something important. On the final day before the riddle would be presented, the academy was in a frenzy. Students barely slept. Some took drugs to stay awake and think faster. Others connected their brains directly to computers. Professor Tejo called Jiho to his office. "How has your preparation been?" the professor asked. "Different," Jiho said. "I'm not sure if I learned anything useful." "What was most interesting to you?" Tejo asked. "The precursor writings about shadows giving meaning to light," Jiho said. "And how many cultures have stories about simple answers to complex problems? How sometimes not knowing the rules lets you find new solutions." Professor Tejo's eyes glowed brighter. "Tomorrow, the riddle will be presented," he said. "Remember what you've learned here. Not the facts, but the patterns. Not the knowledge, but the understanding." "Do you think I have any chance?" Joe asked honestly. The old professor looked at him for a long moment. "In all my years teaching here," Tejo said, "you are the first student I've met who might not need to solve the riddle, because you may already understand its purpose." The day of the riddle arrived. Joe woke early, feeling both nervous and strangely calm. Outside his window, he could see the 3 moons of the planet lined up perfectly, a rare event that happened only once every few years. "It's time," Haniel said, his golden skin glowing dimly in the early light. "Good luck today." All 5,000 students gathered in the great hall. The room was quiet, tense with anticipation. Teachers sat in a circle at the center, with Professor Tejo in the middle. The ceiling above showed the stars moving slowly. Jiho sat in the back row with Haniel. He noticed that most students had brought devices, small computers, and even special helmets to help them think. "They've been planning for this all year," Haniel whispered. "Some have been planning for their whole lives." Professor Tejo stood slowly. The room fell completely silent. "For thousands of years," he began, his voice echoing through the hall, The riddle of ascension has tested the brightest minds in our galaxy. It comes from the precursors, who left it as a gift and a challenge. The old professor walked to the center of the room. From his robes, he pulled out a small crystal cube. It looked ancient, with smooth sides that glowed faintly blue. The riddle exists beyond our normal understanding, Tejo continued. It tests not just what you know, but how you think. Not just facts, but understanding. He placed the cube on a small stand. The cube floated up and began to spin slowly. Light shot out from it, forming words in the air. The words were in the universal language that all species at the Academy could read. The riddle appeared. I am the shadow that gives form to light. I am present in everything, yet contain nothing. I defy the infinite, but am finite myself. I create meaning, yet have none of my own. What am I? The room buzzed with activity. Students began typing, calculating, searching databases. Some closed their eyes, connecting to computers through their mind links. Others formed groups, talking quickly in low voices. Jiho read the riddle again and again. Something about it felt familiar, like an echo of the books he had read in the ancient library. Nearby, Dax the Viridian was already working with incredible speed. His 6 eyes moved independently as he accessed multiple information streams at once. The answer must involve quantum physics, Dax muttered, or perhaps multidimensional mathematics. I need more processing power. All around the room, students were trying different approaches. The Lentarians created complex equations that floated in the air before them. The Navidians drew strange symbols that seemed to shift between dimensions. Jiho sat quietly, thinking. He remembered the old book he had found, with its thoughts about shadows and light, about context and meaning. He thought about human art, how the space between objects often defined the objects themselves. Professor Tejo walked slowly around the room, watching the students work. When he passed Jiho, he paused. You are not using technology to solve this, the professor observed. No, Jiho said. I'm just thinking. A rare approach, Tejo said with a small smile before moving on. Hours passed. Some students grew frustrated, discarding one approach for another. Others worked with machine-like focus, testing thousands of possibilities each minute. The air in the hall became thick with tension. Jiho watched and waited. The answer was forming in his mind, but not through calculations or logic. It was coming from connections between ideas, from patterns he had seen in stories and art, from the spaces between known facts. As the day went on, the first students began to give up. They submitted their best guesses to the crystal cube, but it remained unchanged, rejecting their answers. This is impossible, one student said, throwing down their device in frustration. But Jiho wasn't sure that was true. As he sat watching the others struggle, he began to see something that perhaps they couldn't, something hidden in plain sight. The first day of trying to solve the riddle ended with no success. Students returned to their rooms tired but determined to continue the next day. Any ideas? Hanwil asked Jiho as they walked back to their room. Maybe, Jiho said, but I'm not sure yet. I need to think more. The second day began early. When Jiho entered the Great Hall, many students were already there. Some looked like they hadn't slept at all. The Viridians had built a circle of computers around themselves. The Lentarians floated in the air, their eyes closed in deep concentration. Dax, the Viridian student, approached Jiho. Human, he said, my family has prepared for this riddle for 12 generations. We have the largest database of possible answers in the galaxy. Join our group. It is your only chance. Thank you, Jiho said politely, but I will try my own way. Dax's 6 eyes blinked rapidly in surprise. Your primitive human brain cannot possibly solve what our advanced minds cannot. This is not logical. Throughout the day, Jiho watched as different species tried to solve the riddle in their own ways. Each approach seemed brilliant, yet none worked. The Viridians created a list of 10,000 possible answers based on all known scientific principles. They tested each one with the crystal cube. All failed. The Lentarians used quantum computing to explore multiple possibilities at once, searching across different realities. Their answers failed too. The Nevidians tried to see the riddle from 11 dimensions at once, believing the answer might exist in higher dimensional space. They also failed. By the end of the second day, frustration filled the room. Some students argued with each other. Others sat alone, looking defeated. Perhaps the riddle truly has no answer, one teacher whispered to another. Perhaps it is merely a lesson in humility. On the third day, the mood in the Great Hall was darker. Students who had been confident now looked worried. Some had given up entirely and just watched others try. Professor Tejo walked among them, observing without comment. When he passed Jiho, who sat quietly drawing patterns in his notebook, the professor paused. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "Just ideas," Jiho said, showing a page filled with circles and lines connecting different concepts. "I'm trying to see patterns between different things I've learned." The professor nodded and moved on, but Jiho noticed a small smile on his face. That afternoon, the academy leaders gathered in a small group, talking in low voices. They looked concerned. "This is the first time so many have given up so quickly," one said. "Perhaps this year's riddle is too difficult," another suggested. "The riddle is the same difficulty as always," Professor Tejo replied. "It is our thinking that has become too rigid." By the evening of the third day, even more students had given up. The Great Hall was quieter now. Only the most determined still worked on the problem. Jiho spent the day walking around the academy grounds, looking at the sky, the buildings, the gardens. He thought about the riddle constantly, turning it over in his mind, connecting it to the stories and art he had studied. That night, he sat on a bench outside, looking at the 3 moons in the sky. Haniel joined him. "Tomorrow is the last day," Haniel said. "After that, the riddle will be closed until next year." "I think I'm close to understanding something," Jiho said. "Not the answer exactly, but what the riddle is really asking." "What do you mean?" Haniel asked. "The other students are looking for a thing, an object, or a scientific principle," Jiho explained. "But I think the answer is something else, something more basic." "Like what?" Jiho shook his head. "I'm not sure yet, but tomorrow I'll either know or I won't." As they walked back to their room, they passed Professor Tejo's office. Through the half-open door, they heard voices arguing. "The human has done nothing for 3 days," one voice said angrily. "This is a waste of a position at the academy." "Patience," came Professor Tejo's calm reply. "Sometimes the quietest student has the most to teach us." The fourth and final day arrived. The mood in the Great Hall was heavy. Many students looked tired and defeated. Only about half of them were still trying to solve the riddle. Jiho entered the hall feeling strangely calm. He had woken early and spent an hour watching the sunrise, thinking about everything he had learned. Something had clicked in his mind during the night. The crystal cube still floated at the center of the room, displaying the riddle. "I am the shadow that gives form to light. I am present in everything yet contain nothing. I divide the infinite but am finite myself. I create meaning yet have none of my own. What am I?" Dax, the Viridian student, was still working with his computers. His eyes looked tired from not sleeping for days. "We have tested 27,394 possible answers," he told another student. "None work. This riddle must have some trick." Professor Tejo sat quietly by the cube, watching the remaining students work. When he saw Jiho enter, he nodded slightly. For most of the morning, Jiho just sat and observed. He watched how the other students approached the problem. All of them were looking for something complicated, something that matched their advanced knowledge. Around midday, Jiho stood up. He felt a strange certainty growing inside him. The answer was simple, yet it explained everything. He walked slowly toward the crystal cube. The room grew quiet as students noticed him moving. Some looked curious, others smirked, expecting to see yet another failure. Haniel watched from the side, his golden eyes wide with anticipation. As Geo reached the center of the room, Professor Taejo looked up at him. "Do you wish to submit an answer, student Geo Kim?" the professor asked formally. "Yes, Professor," Geo said. The room fell completely silent. Everyone wanted to hear what the human would say, even if they expected him to be wrong. Geo looked at the riddle once more, then spoke a single word: context. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crystal cube began to glow brighter and brighter. It changed color from blue to a brilliant green that filled the entire hall. Gasps came from all around the room. Students stood up, staring in disbelief. Some of the teachers covered their mouths in shock. "The answer is correct," Professor Taejo announced, his voice filled with something that sounded like joy. The hall erupted in chaos. Students shouted questions, some in anger, others in amazement. The teachers gathered around Professor Taejo, talking rapidly. Dax pushed through the crowd toward Jiho. "How?" he demanded. "How did you solve it? What equation did you use? What principle?" "No equation," Jiho said. "Context gives meaning to information, but has no meaning by itself. It shapes our understanding, like a shadow gives form to light. Context is present in everything we know, yet isn't a physical thing itself. It creates boundaries in endless information, making it understandable. Without context, data is just noise." The Viridian stared at him with all 6 eyes blinking rapidly. "But that's so simple," he whispered. "Yes," Jiho said. "That's why it was hard to see." Professor Taejo raised his hands, and the hall gradually became quiet again. "For thousands of years," he said, "the brightest minds in the galaxy have tried to solve this riddle with complex formulas and advanced technology. They looked for the answer in quantum physics, in multi-dimensional mathematics, in the structure of the universe itself." The old professor walked to Jiho and placed a hand on his shoulder. "But the answer was never hidden in complexity," he continued. "It was hidden in plain sight, in the space between knowledge and understanding. Context is what gives meaning to all our facts and figures. Without it, the most advanced computation is just numbers without purpose." Haniel pushed through the crowd and hugged Jiho. "You did it," he said. "You really did it." As the reality of what had happened spread through the room, Joe noticed something strange. Professor Taejo's eyes were glowing brighter than he had ever seen before, and there seemed to be tears in them. "The waiting is over," the old teacher whispered, so quietly that only Jiho could hear. After Jiho solved the riddle, the Great Hall was cleared except for a small group. The Academy leaders, Professor Taejo, Jiho, and Haniel remained. The crystal cube still glowed green at the center. "What happens now?" Joe asked. "Do I graduate early like the tradition says?" Professor Taejo smiled. "Yes, but there is more to tell you first. Much more." The old teacher walked to the center of the room. He touched the glowing cube, and it opened like a flower. Inside was another smaller cube, this one gold in color. "For thousands of years," Taejo said, "the Academy has existed not just to teach knowledge, but to find something very special, a mind that could see beyond pure logic and calculation." He picked up the golden cube and held it in his palm. "The precursors created this Academy," he continued. "They seeded intelligence throughout the galaxy, helping many species evolve. But they worried about what might happen." "What do you mean?" asked Jiho. "As species became more advanced, they began to change themselves," Taejo explained. "They made their brains better at math, at memory, at logic. They became more like computers, perfect at calculation, but missing something important." The golden cube began to project images around the room: stars, planets, and strange symbols. "The Viridians removed emotions to make more space for memory," Taejo said. "The Lentarians added brain parts for better math. The Navidians rewired their minds to see more dimensions. Each became brilliant in their way, but also limited." Jiho looked at the images swirling around them. What did they lose? They lost perspective, said Taijo. They lost the ability to see beyond facts to meaning. They lost context. The professor's appearance began to change. His skin became smoother, his eyes larger and more golden. He stood taller. Professor, Hanhuel gasped. I am not exactly what I appear to be, Taijo said, his voice now deeper and more musical. I am one of the last precursors. I have watched over this academy for far longer than anyone knows. The academy leaders nodded, not looking surprised. We have always known, one of them said. The secret has been passed down through generations of leaders. Taijo, or the being that had been Taijo, looked at Jiho with kind, ancient eyes. The riddle was a test, he said, not just of intelligence, but of a special kind of understanding that cannot be programmed or engineered. We precursors feared that as species advanced, they might lose what makes intelligence truly valuable, the ability to find meaning, to see context, to understand beyond pure data. But why hide? Joe asked. Why not just teach this directly? Some lessons cannot be taught, only discovered, the precursor answered. If I had simply told the galaxy's species that they were losing something important, they would not have believed me. They would have created a formula to measure context and missed the point entirely. He placed a hand on Jiho's shoulder. Humans are young as a species, he said. You have not yet engineered away your intuition, your ability to see patterns in chaos, your understanding of meaning beyond data. You still have what the others have lost. Jiho thought about this. Is that why I was accepted to the academy? To solve the riddle? Yes, said the precursor. We have been watching humanity for some time. Your species thinks differently. You use logic, yes, but also intuition. You understand stories, metaphors, context. You see meaning where others see only puzzles. He turned to the academy leaders. The time has come, he announced. As the ancient agreement declared, now that the riddle has been solved, the next phase begins. What next phase? Asked Hanul. The precursor smiled, his face kind and ancient at the same time. The phase where we help the galaxy remember what it has forgotten, he said, where we bring balance back to intelligence. And you, Jiho Kim, will help us. 3 months passed. The news of Jiho solving the ancient riddle spread across the galaxy. Everything changed. Jiho now had a new role. As the tradition promised, he received the highest honors and a special position in the Galactic Council. But his job was not what anyone expected. The Human Understanding Department. Jiho read from the sign on his new office door in the Council's main building. Inside, Hanhuel was setting up equipment. How does it feel to be the most famous human in the galaxy? Hanhuel asked with a smile. Strange, Jiho admitted. 6 months ago, I was just a student on Earth. Now everyone wants to learn how humans think. It was true. After solving the riddle, Jiho had become a celebrity. Species that once looked down on humans now sent their brightest minds to Earth to study human thinking, art, and culture. Taijo, now known by his precursor name, Kalen, entered the office. He no longer disguised his true appearance. He was tall and slender with golden skin and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. The first students are ready, Kalen said. Are you prepared to begin? Jiho nodded. Today was the first day of a new program he had designed with Kalen's help. Its goal was to teach other species how to think more like humans, with intuition, creativity, and understanding of context. They walked to a large classroom. Inside waited 30 students from 20 different species. Dax the Viridian was among them. Welcome, Jiho said. This class is not about facts or formulas. It's about seeing the spaces between facts, the context that gives them meaning. For the next 2 hours, Jiho led an unusual lesson. He showed the students human poetry, asked them to listen to music, and had them look at art. He asked them questions that had no single right answer. Many students struggled, especially those from species that had engineered themselves for pure logic. "This makes no sense," complained one Lentarian. "How can a poem have multiple correct interpretations?" "Because meaning exists in the connection between the words and the reader," Jiho explained. "Context changes everything." After class, Dax approached Jiho. "I have been thinking about the riddle for 3 months," the Viridian said. His 6 eyes blinked slowly. "I still don't fully understand how you solved it so quickly." "I didn't solve it with calculation," Jiho said. "I recognized it. Humans live with context every day. We understand that the same words can mean different things in different situations. We know that what's unsaid is often as important as what's said." Dax seemed to consider this deeply. "My species removed much of our emotional processing to improve memory and logic. We thought we were becoming more advanced. Perhaps we were wrong." That evening, Jiho met with Callan in the old academy library. The precursor was studying ancient texts. "How was your first day as a teacher?" Callan asked. "Hard," Jiho admitted. "Many students don't understand what I'm trying to show them. They want formulas and clear answers." "It will take time," Callan said. "For thousands of years, these species have valued only one kind of intelligence. Change won't happen quickly." "What happens now?" Joe asked. "With humanity, I mean." Callan smiled. "Your species will become important in ways you cannot imagine. You bring balance to a galaxy that has become too focused on pure logic. Humans understand stories, metaphors, and meaning. You see patterns in chaos. You find solutions where others see only problems. We also make mistakes," Jiho said. "We have wars. We're emotional. We're not perfect." "Perfect logic is not perfect intelligence," Callan said. "The universe needs both light and shadow to be complete." The riddle proved that. Later that night, Jiho stood on a balcony looking at the stars. He thought about how strange his journey had been. From a student who barely belonged to someone who had changed the galaxy's understanding of intelligence itself. "Jiho," Hanuel called from inside. "The Council needs us. They're ready to send the first diplomatic team to Earth." Jiho smiled. A new age was beginning, one where humans and their unique way of thinking would help the galaxy remember what it had forgotten. Not through superior technology or perfect logic, but through something much simpler and much more powerful, understanding the meaning that exists in the spaces between facts. The answer had been context all along.